Put your faith in the light.
Hello guys, welcome to another one of my videos. This is Lightblade, and well, I've been gone for a bit, but I wanted to give you guys my thoughts about the recent changes that Retribution Paladins got a few days ago. So funny thing is, I wanted to test them in a key, in the beta. The problem is Blizzard also broke Retribution Paladins. Watch this.
One hour later. One eternity later.
So yeah, testing at the moment is kind of worthless because I don't think it's intended for us to have 100% wings uptime. Anyways, we can still analyze the changes, so let's go into the notes. Okay guys, here we are at the notes. So let's start with the hero talents and Herald of the Sun. For this, we have a buff to Sun's avatar. Its damage is going to be increased by 20%. This is effectively a 1% buff because at the end of a key, Sun's avatar was going to be doing around 5% of your damage, which is pretty good. Eternal Flame also got a nice buff. It's going to be 35% more effective on self. It's important it's only on yourself, not on anyone else. It was 25%. This is really good because self-healing was a bit weak with all the nerfs that Blizz has been doing to avoidance, to leech, to all those things. So self-sustain was, like I said, pretty weak. You could like Word of Glory, basically the same as Eternal Flame yourself, and it did nothing. Your bar didn't move, so I like this change a lot. Okay, now let's talk about the Templar hero talent changes. So the first one is Wrathful Descent, now deals 100% of the damage to nearby enemies when Empyrean Hammer critically strikes. It was 80% before. So this is a pretty huge buff in AoE for Templar. The Empyrean Hammers basically do full damage to everything as long as it's close to the target they hit, and they are also a big chunk of your damage at the end of a Mythic Plus dungeon as your overall. So this is a really good buff for Templar. Okay, the next change is to Templar's Sacrosanct Crusade. The healing from this can no longer crit. So this was a pretty overpowered interaction that it had because, well, basically the Sacrosanct Crusade reads like this. Whenever you use your Hammer of Light, you get a 20% max health heal. That's increased by 2% for each target hit up to 5. So basically a 30% max health heal if you hit 5 things. But if you were at full health, instead of that, you got a 30% shield. So that was really strong to prevent damage. Now, if you crit the healing, you also got the 60% max health shield instead, So yeah, that was really strong, and that's no longer going to be able to happen. Now let's go to the Retribution specific changes. Okay, Retribution specific changes. The first one is to our Nerubar Palace 4-tier set bonus. Wake of Ashes increases your damage done by 8% for 8 seconds instead of the 10% that it did in the past. So no sugarcoating this, it is a nerf, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge nerf. The uptime of this bonus is around 26% of the dungeon, so we're not losing a ton of damage, but we are losing some of it. Next change is to Blessed Champion, which surprisingly is getting a buff. At first I thought it was a typo, but the damage is now being reduced by 25% instead of 50%. The wording is a bit confusing, but this is actually making our cleave with Judgment, Crusading Strikes or Templar Strikes if you're using that very strong. Not only that, once we scale and combine that with our Mastery damage procs, we're looking at insane cleave damage, but that will probably happen only once we are fully geared for the patch. Okay, so the next 3 changes are for the same spell, our single target Holy Power Spender. That can be Final Verdict, Templar's Verdict, and Just a Curse Vengeance. They are all getting hit with a 10% damage decrease. It's a bummer to see them nerfing our single target, but I think it's somewhat justified because of how our talents are at the moment in the beta. It's a lot easier to get all of our AoE stuff and do well in single target as well. We also got a lot more new tools to do single target, like the hero talents and even our mastery once we get enough of it to guarantee the hits from Judgment. Okay, the next change is to Hammer of Wrath. The damage has been reduced by 15%. So the same logic applies here to the last 3 changes. They are nerfing our single target damage, mostly because we have pretty decent access to our AoE tools in single target situations, and they don't want us to be like incredibly good for both things. We do have to make some sacrifices. The next change, Blade of Justice. So it's going to get reduced by 20%. This doesn't affect Blade of Vengeance. So basically what this means is that they're nerfing the single target part of Blade of Justice. So we can see a pattern. They don't want us to do so good single target and also have like the massive AoE that we have. Actually, they are going to buff our AoE further because the next change is Blade of Vengeance damage increased by 25%. That's the AoE part of Blade of Justice. That means that uncapped AoE is gonna go wild. The next change is to Expurgation. The damage got reduced by 10%, but this is a totally justified nerf because they did a small change to Expurgation dot a patch ago that made it so reapplications of it not only refreshes the duration of the dot, but adds on top of each other. This change net buffed Expurgation massively. You can see the effects of this interaction in the pre-patch, where it currently is one of our top damage sources in most Mythic Plus overalls. Okay, the next change is Divine Storm's damage got increased by 25%. So this is a pretty huge change because, well, yeah, Divine Storm is one of your top damages at the end of Mythic Plus dungeons. This change is a lot more impactful for Herald of the Sun players than it is for Templar ones because, yeah, Templars use Divine Storm for AoE, but they also rely a lot on the Empyrean Hammers, which also got a buff. You know, they now hit 100% of their damage when they critically strike. But Herald of the Sun users have multiplicative damage interactions with Divine Storms. You know, they can make it proc again for 30% of its value. They can make it crit more often. So yeah, it's a bit stronger for Herald of the Suns, but it's a pretty impactful buff to have. Okay, so the next two changes are for the same spell, Templar Strikes. Both the first and second hit have been reduced by 10%. This was kind of expected because both their damage values were too high. On top of that, they had a very strong interaction with the newly changed Heart of the Crusader talent. Being able to put 2 points into that made Templar Strikes just a bit too strong. The next two changes are also affecting the same talent node. This time it's Crusading Strikes and normal untalented Crusader Strike for whatever reason. I'm guessing they can't nerf the talented versions without nerfing the baseline one. Both are losing 10% damage. But for Crusading Strikes, there is a reason that is from recent talent changes, and it's because of Zealot's Fervor. The talent now gives up to 40% attack speed, pushing Crusading Strikes, mostly the Holy Power generation, to the edge, so they nerfed its damage to compensate. Next up, we have a nice survivability buff to Word of Glory healing, increased by 20%, and finally, an issue causing Radiant Glory to not function with fast back-to-back procs have been resolved, but in turn has broken Retribution Paladins. As you saw at the start of the video, we have permanent wings as long as we're doing AoE, which is crazy. As a conclusion, how does Ret fare after these changes? Well, in AoE and Cleave, we are going to be monsters, blasting packs of trash with both consistent and explosive DPS. We do have to scale though, so don't expect us to be blasting from the get-go. And to be honest, I wasn't really expecting them to buff our AoE by this much, but it's a welcome change. As for single target, this is where yes, we were nerfed. Our damage will be a bit lower, but this is mostly the consequence of having easy access to our AoE tools, even in single target builds. Can't be a monster in both things. Most of the other changes were just neutral in value. You know, Crusader Strikes, Crusading Strikes, and Templar Strikes are just Blizzard trying to adjust to the redesign of talents we had a few patches ago. The same thing with Expurgation. Should you panic as a Ret Paladin? No, Ret will be great, don't worry. Still one of the most fun specs to play, and still the Swiss Army knife of melees. We can answer to almost everything the game throws at us. And well guys, that's going to be the video for today. I hope it was useful and you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching everyone.